Hi, I'm Vera. I was the only heartbeat left in my grandfather's room while my family's laughter echoed down the hall. Then the monitor went flat, and a nurse pressed a letter into my palm. My name. A key. 5 chilling words. They've already started without you. Comment where and when you're listening, because the storm that letter unleashed will feel personal. I remember the sound before I remember the feeling. It was the beeping, soft, steady, mechanical, the kind of rhythm that makes you more aware of your own breathing. I'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours, watching the pale blue light of the hospital monitor cast faint shadows on my grandfather's face. He didn't move, not a blink, not even a twitch. Just the shallow rise and fall of his chest, each breath sounding further away from the last. No one else was around. Down the hall, someone was laughing, probably in one of the family celebration rooms. You know, the ones they offer when someone's just had a new baby or survived a surgery. I heard clinking glasses, muffled voices. One of them sounded like my cousin Becca. Maybe it was. They all knew he was dying tonight, but no one came in. Not a knock, not a glance through the open door. Just me. And him. That's how it always was. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the helpful one, not the golden child, not the troublemaker, just Vera, the girl who cleaned up after everyone's mess and never made one herself. I used to think that was something to be proud of. Now I just think it made me invisible. I glanced down at my lap. My hands were resting on the scratchy hospital blanket I'd brought from home. Grandpa always liked this one, dark green plaid, worn soft over the years. He said it reminded him of his army days. I used to joke that it smelled like mothballs and old leather. He'd laugh and tell me that meant it had history. I reached over and tucked the corner of the blanket near his shoulder. His skin looked so thin now, almost translucent. I leaned closer. "You remember the butterscotch candies?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "You always had them in your pocket. You'd sneak me one when Mom wasn't looking." My throat tightened. I swallowed hard. "You used to say I saw what others missed. I never knew what that meant." He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. He hadn't opened his eyes in over a day. The nurse said it was only a matter of hours. But still, I waited. The lights overhead flickered slightly, cheap fluorescent bulbs doing their usual hum. I stared at the edge of the ceiling tile above his bed. A tiny stain, like a coffee spill frozen in time, had been there since we arrived last week. No one fixed it. No one noticed. Except me. That's what I did. I noticed things. The room grew quieter somehow, like the hospital itself was holding its breath. I turned back to Grandpa. His chest had stopped moving. I leaned in, still. The monitor, once rhythmic and insistent, began to slow. Then it flatlined, not loud or jarring like in the movies, just a soft, steady tone that sounded final. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I reached for his hand and held it gently in mine. It felt lighter than I remembered, like he'd already started leaving days ago, and this was just the end of the echo. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "for seeing me." A moment passed, then a soft knock. I turned. A nurse stood in the doorway, not the usual one. She was older, maybe mid-50s, with soft lines around her eyes and a warmth I didn't expect at 3 in the morning. She stepped in slowly, holding something in her hand. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, her voice like a quiet blanket. I nodded, unable to speak. She walked closer and held out a small envelope. It was yellowed at the edges, like it had been folded and refolded over the years. My name, just Vera, was written on the front in his handwriting. "He asked me to give this to you," she said. "Only you. Told me not to open it, not to let anyone else near it." I took it from her hands, heart thudding louder than the machine's. "Thank you," I murmured, clutching it like it might vanish. She nodded once, then quietly turned and left, closing the door behind her. I stared at the envelope for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a brass key, heavy, cold, old, and a single folded sheet of paper. His handwriting again, shaky but unmistakable. "Go to the blue shed, use the back entrance, do not tell anyone, trust your eyes." "Pops." That was it. No explanation. No long farewell. Just those words. My fingers trembled as I held the key. The weight of it didn't make sense, like it belonged to something bigger than a shed. I looked around the silent room, then back down at him. "Why me?" I whispered. No answer. But somewhere beneath the grief, something stirred. A flicker, not hope exactly, not fear either, curiosity maybe, or the beginning of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. I folded the note carefully and slid both it and the key into my coat pocket. As I stood to leave, I paused at the door and looked back one last time. His face looked peaceful, lighter somehow, like he knew I'd come, and that I'd understand, eventually. I opened the door slowly. The hallway was still lit with that pale, sleepy glow, still filled with distant laughter and closed doors. But something felt different, as if the walls were listening now, as if the quiet had shifted. And as I looked up from the key in my palm, the corridor that had always overlooked me suddenly felt like it was watching. I didn't move right away. The hallway was still, but it carried a strange pressure, like the walls were leaning in just slightly, listening. I slid the key back into the envelope, folded it, and tucked it into the deepest corner of my coat pocket. Then I stood, quietly, and walked out without saying goodbye to anyone, not that anyone would have noticed. 2 days passed. The funeral came and went in a blur of polished shoes, casseroles, and awkward handshakes. No one mentioned the shed. No one mentioned me either, not really. They said, "Poor Vera," or "She's so good with the old folks," like I was a piece of worn-out furniture that stayed behind to collect dust once the mourning was done. By the time I drove back out to the farm, the sky had started to tint orange behind the line of trees Grandpa planted when I was little. His house, now silent, sat like a ghost of itself. The porch swing he used to rock in groaned in the wind. The garden bench near the roses was half collapsed, its planks soft from rain and time. No one else stayed after the service. They came, they grieved, and they left. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I parked near the old barn and sat in the car for a moment, watching the light flicker through the branches. The key was in my hand again before I realized I'd pulled it out. Small, heavy, cold. I turned it once, then again, before opening the door and stepping into the crunch of gravel and brittle leaves. The shed stood at the far edge of the property, hidden behind a thicket of vines and stubborn wildflowers that had claimed the fence years ago. I could see it now, just barely. Faded blue wood, slanted roof, a padlock that gleamed faintly even from this distance. I remembered asking once when I was 7 what was inside. "That's where the junk goes," Mom had snapped. "Don't bother with it." But I also remembered something else. One fall afternoon when I wandered too close, Grandpa had gently taken my hand and said, "Someday you might need to go there, but only when you're ready." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought he meant the shed had spiders. I followed the worn path toward it, ducking under low branches. My boots squelched slightly in the soft dirt. As I approached, a flicker of motion to my right caught my eye. Elias, the groundskeeper, was leaning against the tool shed beside the barn, a rake resting on his shoulder. He didn't wave. He never did. Just watched me, expression unreadable, like he'd seen this moment coming for years. I turned away and pressed through the vines until I reached the back of the blue shed. There it was, the second door, smaller, tucked behind a wall of ivy, almost invisible. My fingers trembled slightly as I fit the brass key into the lock. It turned with more resistance than I expected, grinding against time and rust. The door groaned as it opened, as if it hadn't moved in decades. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dry wood, motor oil, and something older, like time itself had settled here and gone still. Dust hung in long slants of amber light from a single cracked window. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with tools, yellowing manuals, jars of bolts and screws. But it was the large shape in the center of the room that caught my breath. A heavy canvas tarp covered something tall and rectangular. I hesitated, fingers at the edge of the cloth. Then I pulled. Beneath it was a tall, dented filing cabinet, industrial gray, bolted to the floor, and next to it, a wooden chest. The kind I used to imagine held pirate treasure or old war medals. The chest opened with a soft creak. Inside were several leather-bound journals, their spines cracked and edges stained with age. On top of them sat a manila folder, brittle and yellowed, marked in bold handwriting, "Inheritance, Private." I stared at it for a moment, my hands rooted in place. The word inheritance echoed louder than the hum of the wind against the shed. I lifted the folder, feeling the weight of it, not just in paper but in everything it might undo or reveal. Then I heard it, footsteps on the gravel just outside. Crunch, crunch, getting closer. I froze. "Vera?" The voice was unmistakable, sharp, disbelieving. "What the hell are you doing here alone?" "My brother." I didn't move. The folder still in my hands. My pulse quickened. Crunch, closer still, meaner now. I slid the folder under my coat just as his boots hit the doorway. Wyatt's silhouette filled the frame, shoulders squared, chin lifted the way it always was when he thought he held the upper hand. "Vera." He drew out my name like a warning. "Grandpa's gone 2 days and you're rummaging through junk? Thought you'd have more respect." I blocked the chest with my body, forcing calm into my voice. "I'm locking up. You've been busy with everything else." He stepped inside, gaze darting to the cleared space where the tarp lay crumpled. "What did you take from that shed?" "Nothing that belongs to you." He chuckled, short, humorless. "You know that place was never for us. Dad said Grandpa kept trash in here to remind himself what hoarding looks like." He lifted an empty paint can, let it clang back onto the shelf. "This," he waved broadly, "was off limits for a reason, for your own good." My pulse thundered, but I kept my tone even. "Funny, you never worried about my good when you left me to handle hospice." He ignored the bait. "Look, I'm being nice. Hand over whatever you found and we'll forget this happened." My fingers closed tighter around the folder. "Grandpa trusted me with it." Wyatt's mouth twitched. "You still believe he was thinking clearly? The man thought it was 1985 half the time. Don't let his odd ideas confuse you." He tapped his temple, as though I were the one slipping. Silence stretched between us, thick as dust motes in the dim light. I let it stand. Eventually he shifted, uneasy. When Wyatt couldn't draw a reaction, he grew restless. "Fine." He backed toward the door. "But don't say I didn't try. You'll thank me when this blows up in your face." He left without another word. I counted to 20, waited for his engine to fade, then secured the chest and fled the shed, locking it as Grandpa instructed. Elias still leaned by the barn, rake across his palms. Our eyes met. He offered a single, slow nod, as if to say, "I saw nothing." I climbed into my car and drove the 45 miles to Bloomington, headlights carving tunnels through the dark Indiana backroads. By the time I reached my apartment, the town had settled into a weekday hush. Streetlights flickered against cracked sidewalks. My place sat on the second floor of a converted Victorian, high ceilings, bare walls, one thrift store sofa. The quiet fit me most nights. Tonight it felt fragile. I set the folder on the coffee table but didn't open it. First, I locked the door, checked it twice. Then I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from Wyatt. 1 text. "We should talk before you do something dumb." I muted the thread and dropped the phone beside the folder. My coat was still on when a sharp knock rattled the door. I exhaled through clenched teeth, swung it open a few inches. Wyatt filled the hall again, this time with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Little sis, I drove all the way here to make sure you're okay. It's after 10. Family doesn't keep office hours." He brushed past before I answered, taking up space in my living room like he owned the air. "Cozy. Minimal," he observed, tone dripping with judgment. He turned. "Let's cut to it. Did Grandpa give you something? Because if you're chasing fantasies—" My phone buzzed. Different tone. "Mom." Wyatt gestured. "Answer. She's worried about you." I put it on speaker. "Mom? Her voice came through thin and brittle. "Sweetheart, Wyatt says you're upset. Your grandfather had odd notions at the end. Don't let them lead you astray." "I'm not astray," I said quietly. She sighed. "You've always been sensitive. Remember how you insisted your 8th grade teacher lost your essay? Turned out you never handed it in." Wyatt smirked at the memory she'd twisted. Gaslighting tag team. I swallowed. I remember handing it to her. "Memory's tricky," Mom murmured. Wyatt cut in, sugar sweet. "We'll sort this, Mom. Love you." He ended the call before she could respond, then turned to me. "See? We're just looking out for you." He held out his hand, palm up. "Whatever's in that folder, let me check it. Make sure you're not getting hurt." I met his gaze. "I'll manage." His smile vanished. "You're making a mistake." When I didn't move, he shrugged, walked to the door, and left without goodbye. Only then did my knees wobble. I locked up, drew curtains, and finally sat. The manila folder felt heavier than before. I broke the brittle clasp and lifted the flap. First, a notarized amendment, dated 9 months ago, signed by Grandpa, witnessed by Evelyn Hughes, his attorney. Language was clear. All farmland, house, and liquid assets transferred to Vera Lynn Monroe. My heart pounded. Next, a bank statement showing bonds and CDs titled in my name. And on top of the financials, a yellow post-it, edges curled. "Only the one who stayed will know how to keep this safe." The handwriting, breath-catching. I thought that was everything until a smaller envelope slid free. Inside, a photocopy of the original will listing my cousin Jonathan as primary heir. Why switch to me? Why keep Jonathan in the photocopy? Questions spiraled, but one name pulsed louder than the rest. Jonathan Carter. Cousin I hadn't seen since he bolted west 10 years ago after a family spat nobody explained. The room felt too small for the realization blooming in my chest. I needed an ally. I needed a lawyer. Daylight had barely stained the horizon when I pushed the last USB drive across my desk and watched it click into place beside 2 neat stacks of photocopies. All night I'd been scanning, encrypting, labeling. The folder Grandpa left now lived in triplicate: cloud, thumb drive, and a fire-safe box wedged beneath my sink. If Wyatt decided to drop by again, he'd find nothing but empty paper sleeves. I rinsed my face, changed clothes, and drove north. Fog hugged the interstate, thin as breath on glass, forcing me to keep the speedometer reasonable. Part of me wished the drive were longer. Another part counted every mile marker, afraid courage might leak out between them. By 7:15, I was rolling into downtown Indianapolis, watching old brick storefronts give way to mirrored towers and valet stands. Franklin and Hughes occupied an 11-story building that looked imported from an earlier century. Mahogany doors, brass plaques polished to a mirror. I pulled the lobby handle and felt the chill of air conditioning replace autumn damp. A receptionist with hair the color of snow glanced up. "Ms. Monroe." I nodded, surprised she knew. She gestured toward a paneled elevator. "Ms. Hughes is expecting you." The ride to the 8th floor felt longer than the highway. My reflection in the polished steel walls looked smaller than I felt last night. Adrenaline had drained, leaving a steadier kind of determination. The elevator slid open onto a foyer that smelled of lemon oil and leather bindings. Evelyn Hughes waited by her office door, silver-haired bun, neat as a judge's gavel, dark suit impeccably pressed, eyes sharp, kind, missing nothing. "You're Henry's girl," she said, offering a measured smile. "He said you might come." No one had called me Henry's girl since grade school. The words loosened something tight in my chest. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." "I remember the shy little thing who sat right there," she pointed to a burgundy settee, hugging her grandfather's coat while he signed papers. Her smile softened, then vanished into business. "Let's see what you brought." Inside, her office felt like the inside of a time capsule. Walls lined with century-old case reporters, a brass banker's lamp casting warm light over an orderly desk. I placed the manila folder atop the blotter. She opened it, skimmed without comment, then reached a locked drawer. From it she removed a sealed envelope stamped in red. "Hold until key presented." My breath stalled. Evelyn slit the seal, unfolded a short addendum, then turned it toward me. The language mirrored the document I'd scanned at 2 a.m. Same date, same witnesses, same notarization. She tapped the lower corner. See the symbol? Your grandfather used it on all private directives. Only 2 people knew that, him and me. She slid another document free, a typed instruction sheet. If Ms. Monroe arrives with the brass key, release the attached deed transfer immediately. Her gaze met mine. Did you bring it? I fished the key from my pocket. Metal clinked against wood, her shoulders lowered, almost imperceptibly. Henry planned every inch. She leaned back. He feared the rest of the family would object, maybe even bury the paperwork. He wanted you to find proof yourself, said you'd need the confidence it gives. A memory surfaced, uninvited. Age 9, swinging my legs on that settee while Grandpa whispered to this same lawyer, "She's the one, but don't tell her yet." I'd forgotten the conversation, but the image of their bent heads returned now, vivid. "He never told anyone?" I asked. "He believed silence kept you safe long enough to grow your own spine." Her smile flickered. "Looks like he was right." She outlined the essentials. Land parcels totaling 200 acres, house and outbuildings, a modest stock portfolio. All mine, legal, recorded, waiting. The only missing step was formal recognition at probate, which Wyatt had conveniently forgotten to commence. Evelyn's voice steadied. "We'll file for letters testamentary this week, then petition to void any conflicting filings. Wyatt's renunciation document won't stand once the forgery's proven." A pulse of relief, then fear's aftertaste. "They'll fight." She folded her hands. "They'll try. Question is whether you're ready to defend what's rightfully yours." Mom questioning my memory, of Wyatt's smirk in my living room, of Grandpa's steady voice on that thumb drive thanking me for seeing him when no one else did. A slow heat rose in my stomach. Not rage, something older and steadier. "I'm ready," I said. Evelyn nodded, satisfied. "Then we begin." She slid a thin stack of forms toward me, along with a fountain pen that felt heavier than it looked. I signed where she pointed, initials neat, date precise. Each stroke felt like laying brick on a foundation Grandpa poured in secret. An hour later, paperwork complete, she walked me to the elevator. "Take care driving home," she said. "And Vera, remember, they'll paint you as greedy. Stay factual. Let evidence speak." I thanked her, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the lobby button. As the doors eased shut, I saw her still watching, eyes gleaming with something that looked a lot like respect. Outside, sunlight bounced off the glass towers, brighter than when I'd arrived. Traffic hummed, strangers hurried past, but everything felt newly balanced, like the world had tilted a degree in my favor. I slipped the certified copies into my satchel, tugged the strap across my chest, and exhaled into the cool morning. I wasn't just carrying documents. I was carrying proof that silence had never been weakness. I left the building gripping the folder to my chest like it was made of gold leaf and glass. My fingers still buzzed from the handshake Evelyn gave me, firm, deliberate, like she was passing a baton instead of legal documents. Outside, the wind had picked up, pulling at my coat as if urging me to keep going. And I did. That afternoon, I caught a 1:10 p.m. train out of Union Station and rode the nearly empty car south, surrounded by strangers absorbed in crossword puzzles, earbuds, or paperbacks. I stared at my reflection in the window, trying to picture Grandpa Henry planning all this behind the scenes. How long had he known they'd try to shut me out? That they'd lie? By 3:20 p.m., I was walking up the limestone steps of the Morgan County Recorder's Office, a historic building with pillars and flaking green trim, the kind of place people drove past without noticing. But I noticed now. Every brick looked like it held a secret. Inside, the air smelled of dustless paper and citrus cleaner. A woman with silver curls and a soft cardigan sat behind a glass partition, tapping keys with the same energy I remembered from my third-grade teacher. "Afternoon," she said brightly, not looking up. "What can I help you find today?" "Hi," I said, setting my bag on the counter. "I'm here to look up a property record. Parcel ID." I unfolded the slip of paper Evelyn had given me. 5, 13, 44, 300, 08, 09, 015. The woman paused. Her name tag read Doris. She looked up and studied me for a moment, then typed the number in with practiced ease. She murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "That file's been pulled twice in the last 6 months. Unusual for a family trust." "Pulled by whom?" She squinted, then glanced around the nearly empty room and lowered her voice. "Once by an attorney from Indianapolis, Franklin something. The other was filed locally, Wyatt Moore." My spine tensed. "That's my uncle," I said, barely keeping the edge out of my voice. Doris tapped a few more times, then said gently, "Want to come around here and see this with me?" She pushed a door open, and I stepped behind the counter. There, on the monitor, were 2 records side by side. One dated 6 months ago, marked with a transfer of ownership from Henry Whitmore to Vera E. Whitmore, my full name, clear as daylight. The second, dated just 4 weeks later, was an addendum of renunciation. "That's not my signature," I whispered. "The addendum claimed I'd voluntarily renounced the deed back into the estate for personal and spiritual reasons. It was signed with my name, but not in my handwriting. And below that, witnessed by Wyatt Moore, executor." "Honey," Doris said, quietly sliding the print button. "This looks dirty." She didn't say anything more, just hit print and slid the documents across the counter. My hands shook as I picked them up. "I don't know if you're planning to fight this," she added, "but if you are, don't lose these." I nodded, tucking them into my bag like evidence from a crime scene, because that's exactly what it felt like. As I stepped outside into the cool gray air, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to press accept. "Vera," a voice said, low and wary. "It's Grayson." My cousin, one of the only ones who ever showed an ounce of decency at family gatherings. He always sat next to Grandpa, always brought store-bought desserts instead of pretending he'd baked. "You stirred something, didn't you?" he said. "I didn't mean to," I replied honestly, "but I'm not backing off." He exhaled, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. "Did you know," I finally asked, "that I was in the will?" Another pause. Then, "He told me once, if I ever saw your name on anything, I was supposed to back off." "Why?" "Because it meant the storm had started, and I wasn't meant to be part of it." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Grayson, they filed a fake renunciation. My name is still on the original deed." He cursed under his breath, then said, "You think it was Wyatt?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes had just landed on the notary stamp on the addendum, an ornate blue seal that read, "Pamela K. Landon, State of Indiana." Pamela, my sister-in-law's best friend since college, the one who always seemed to be around when I wasn't invited, the one who once said, while pouring sweet tea at a 4th of July picnic, "Not everyone's meant to be part of the inner circle, Vera. Some of us are just background." My grip on the paper tightened. "Let me guess," I said quietly. "Pam Landon notarized it." Grayson didn't respond. I looked out across the courthouse square, where the fall wind carried leaves in slow spirals around the benches and war memorial. I wasn't just holding forged paperwork, I was holding proof of collusion. "Grayson," I said, steady now, "if you care at all about doing what's right, I need you to stay out of their way. And if they come after me—" "They already are," he said. "You just haven't seen the teeth yet." I ended the call and stood there a moment longer. My hands trembled, but I wasn't scared. I was angry. And that meant I was finally ready. The next morning, the sky hung low over Morgan County like a wool blanket left out in the rain. I parked across the street from the sheriff's office, my breath fogging the windshield as I stared at the brown envelope in my passenger seat. Inside were 2 documents, one bearing my legal inheritance, the other bearing a lie dressed up in formal ink. My hands didn't shake this time. I was past the point of fear. What I wanted now was clarity. And maybe, if I was lucky, justice. I stepped inside, brushing off the chill, and approached the desk where a young deputy with cropped hair and a badge that read Hollins looked up from his paperwork. I gave him a polite nod. "Good morning. I need to report a case of forgery, possibly estate fraud." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have evidence." That got me escorted to a back room within minutes. Sheriff Don Leland met me there. He had the measured presence of someone who'd been through more than one storm without raising his voice. Gray at the temples, plaid shirt under his badge, and hands that didn't fidget. "Ms." he asked as he sat across from me. "Vera Morgan," I said, sliding the envelope onto the table between us. "I believe I've had documents fraudulently filed under my name, regarding property that was transferred to me after my grandfather passed." He glanced down, then looked back up at me. "I'll be honest with you, Ms. Morgan. Family estate disputes aren't typically something we get involved in. They're usually handled through civil attorneys." "I understand," I said, unfastening the envelope. "But this isn't a dispute. This is a crime." His hand stilled. I spread the documents before him, side by side. The first, a certified deed showing the transfer of my grandfather's estate to me, filed just weeks before his death. The second, a renunciation document, submitted 4 weeks later, claiming I'd voluntarily given up the property, except the signature wasn't mine. And the notary stamp? I'd recognized the name last night. Sheriff Leland leaned forward. "May I?" I nodded. He examined both pages closely. The pause in his breath told me he saw it too. "This was filed out of order," he said slowly. "And this notary seal." He tapped it twice, then looked up. "Do you know this person?" "I do. She's my sister-in-law's best friend, but that's not what bothers me. What bothers me is that she was supposedly in Tennessee the day this was notarized, in the middle of a family vacation. I called the hotel. She was poolside at 3:45 p.m. That exact time is stamped here." His mouth pressed into a firm line. The room grew quieter. "I'll be frank," he said. This doesn't look right. We'll need to verify with the notary." "She's local," I said. "I brought her office address. It's just down on Maple Avenue." 15 minutes later, we were in his patrol car. He didn't use the sirens, just drove with a quiet steadiness that reminded me of the way my grandfather used to navigate rough dirt roads in the backwoods. No sudden moves, eyes always watching ahead. We pulled up outside the notary office, a small building with a dusty welcome mat and wilting mums in a pot by the door. Sheriff Leland knocked twice, firm but polite. In her 40s answered, brown bob haircut, glasses, cardigan with pearls. She smiled when she saw the sheriff, but her eyes landed on me, and I saw something flicker. Recognition, then worry. "Morning, Cheryl," the sheriff said evenly. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" She hesitated. "Of course. Come in." Inside, her office smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. She sat behind her desk, hands folded tightly. "Ms. Morgan has brought something to our attention," the sheriff began. "Your notary stamp appears on a document that may be fraudulent. Can you tell us where you were on July 14th around 3:45 p.m.? Her throat moved. "That's the week we were in Nashville," she said slowly. "My daughter turned 10. We were at the resort." The sheriff gave her a moment. "Did you notarize a document for a Wyatt Morgan during that trip?" She blinked. He said it was just some cleanup paperwork, that everything was already approved and it just needed to be stamped for filing. I didn't know it involved Vera. I never saw her name." "You notarized a signature without the signer present?" Cheryl's lips parted, then shut. "I was told it was legal," she said faintly, "that it had already been signed. He just needed the stamp for timing." The sheriff nodded once and stood. "Cheryl, I'm going to have to ask you to come down to the station. We'll need a formal statement." Her eyes welled up. "Am I in trouble?" "That depends on what you tell us." She grabbed her purse with trembling hands. I followed them outside, staying back as they walked to the car. The clouds were darker now, wind brushing loose leaves across the lot. Just as I stepped away from the office door, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. The message said, "You should have stayed quiet. You've started something you can't undo." I stared at the screen for a long second, thumb hovering, breath tight. But I didn't text back. I didn't need to. Because deep down, I already knew exactly who sent it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That kind of message wasn't meant for conversation, it was meant as a warning. But they were already too late. By the time the sun dipped below the Bloomington skyline, I had checked every lock in the apartment. Twice. The quiet hum of my old desk lamp spilled over the table where I'd spread out every folder, post-it, and scan I'd compiled. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Not with the text still glowing in my mind like an ember waiting to spark something bigger. I sat down on the edge of the bed and reached for the envelope the nurse had handed me weeks ago. I'd gone through it a dozen times since the day of the funeral. Birth certificates, letters, even Grandpa's faded veteran ID card. But something about tonight, the text, the confrontation with the notary, made me look again. Slower this time, intentional. The lining of the envelope crackled oddly between my fingers. Not paper on paper, but paper against something rigid. I paused. I took the envelope to the desk, slid a letter opener into the bottom seam, and gently pried it open. Out fell a small USB drive, matte black, no markings, except for one faint line of handwriting across a white sticker. For her only. My breath caught. I plugged it into the side of my laptop. The drive blinked once, then showed a single file, augustnightfinal.wav. I clicked. It was scratchy at first. A soft static like wind through dry cornfields. Then I heard him. "Vera girl." Grandpa's voice rasped through the speaker, slow and tired, but warm, like late summer and porch chairs, and the way he used to hum when fixing fence posts. I hadn't realized how much I missed hearing his voice until that moment. "I don't know when you'll find this. Maybe after I'm gone. Maybe after they've already started picking apart what's left." There was a pause. The creak of a wooden chair. The sound of a match lighting. He must have been on the back porch. "I saw it, Vera. I saw how they treated you. Even when you were little. Left out of birthdays. Whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. I wanted to fix it. But if I did anything too loud, they'd know. They'd tear into you sooner." I leaned forward, one hand pressed to my chest, the other gripping the side of the laptop. So I planned quiet. I set things up in ways they wouldn't notice until it was done, until it was yours. But I had to hide it deep. I couldn't leave a trail they'd sniff out. His voice cracked. "You deserved more, baby girl. More than crumbs. You were the only one who stayed. You listened. You helped me build the ramp when my knees gave out. You didn't vanish when it wasn't convenient." Another pause. A long one. Then a sigh. "They're going to fight. Especially Wyatt. He's got poison in his pride. He's been circling the estate like a buzzard since your dad passed. Thought I didn't notice. But I did." Back tears. My father had been distant, even cold some days. I never really knew why. Maybe Grandpa knew more than he let on. I included something else, a clause they'll never expect, because I had to make sure. There was a sound like a paper being tapped on a table. If you're listening to this, it means they've already started, but you... Another creak, a whisper of wind. "You've got it in you, girl. That quiet fire. You don't need to shout. You just need to hold the line." The audio faded briefly, then crackled back. "One more thing," he added. Voice low now, almost a whisper. "You'll want to look under your mama's name, her maiden one. It's in the will, just not where they expect. I left it hidden, but it's there." Then the recording cut. Silence. For a few seconds I just sat there, staring at the screen like it might bring him back. But it didn't. It just stayed there, still and blank. I pushed the laptop aside and leaned back in the chair. My mind was racing, flipping through images, old Christmases, the time I found a gift labeled "To Vera" hidden behind the furnace, unopened. I thought I'd been forgotten. Maybe I hadn't. The fire crackled in my chest now, not rage, but clarity. He knew. He always knew. I stood and walked over to the drawer where I kept an old metal box of keepsakes. Mom's photos were in there, some before she married Dad. I dug through it slowly until I found a faded envelope marked K. Mayhew, Teaching Certificate. Mayhew. That was her name before she became a Landry. I turned the envelope over. Tucked inside was a copy of a property deed, rural land upstate. I didn't recognize it. I didn't remember her ever talking about it. But the signature at the bottom matched her handwriting. Suddenly, the pieces started to click. If Grandpa had included her name somewhere in the estate, without telling the others, it meant she had rights. Rights that could have passed to me. Maybe that's why they never wanted her name spoken. Maybe that's why the family always said, "Leave the past where it belongs." But the past wasn't dead. It was waiting, right there, in a folder, in a recording, in a deed. I went back to the laptop and replayed the file. At the 42-second mark, I heard it again. A pause. Then, Catherine Mayhew, if she ever wants it. But I know she won't. Still, it's hers by blood, and what's hers? He trailed off, but that was enough. I reached for my phone and pulled up the county clerk's site. I typed her name into the property records. I stayed up all night researching deeds in my mother's maiden name, and what I found changed everything. I didn't bother making coffee. After an entire night of cross-referencing property maps and combing through county databases, caffeine felt redundant. The adrenaline of what I'd uncovered kept my nerves humming. At 7:30, I dialed the Morgan County clerk and asked for one more search under the name Catherine Mayhew. The line went quiet, keys clacked, and then the clerk asked, almost apologetically, "Do you realize this parcel hasn't been touched since 1989? My pulse kicked. "Can you email the abstract?" 10 minutes later, a PDF landed in my inbox confirming what Grandpa's recording hinted. A farmhouse and 40 acres on Quiet Hollow Road still sat untitled, unencumbered, taxes prepaid each year from a trust named Silent Oaks. My mother's Silent Oaks. I printed the abstract, grabbed the tin of keys Grandpa once kept on a hook by his back door, and drove west. Highway 231 unraveled through soybean fields browned by early October, then narrowed into a county lane where maples arched overhead like tired guardians. The farther I went, the weaker my cell signal, until only a single bar clung to the screen. The gravel drive appeared suddenly, half hidden by sumac and wild rose. A rusted sign leaned at an angle. Monroe property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I smiled despite myself. He'd used the family surname to warn off his own family. The drive curved past a sagging barn, then opened onto a clearing where the farmhouse sat, 2 stories of weather-gray clapboard, shutters missing but windows intact. Vines crawled the porch railings, their red leaves fluttering like warning flags, yet the front door was freshly painted a deep, steady blue. I stepped out, gravel crunching under my boots. A screen door slammed somewhere behind the barn, and a tall figure emerged, gray beard, army jacket, stride measured. He carried a thermos and a quiet watchfulness. "Morning," he called, voice raspy, kind. "Are you Amos?" I asked. He nodded, stopping a few feet away. "Been expecting you. Henry said the girl with her mother's eyes would come when it was time." My throat tightened. No one had ever compared me to my mother. The family pretended her maiden identity never existed. "How long have you looked after this place?" 90, he said. "Henry paid me every January, told me to keep the roof sound and the locks changed." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a key ring with one brass key distinct from the rest. "This one opens the front door. He said only you were meant to walk through." I took it, metal cold against my palm. "Thank you." He tipped his cap. "I'll be in the trailer if you need anything." Then he turned, leaving me alone with the house and the wind whispering through cornstalks beyond the tree line. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. Furniture sat neatly covered in linen sheets, floors swept, as though someone expected company who never arrived. I walked room to room, fingertips grazing mantel, banister, picture frames. In the parlor, a stack of boxes rested on a small table. On top lay a single envelope, for Vera, when she's ready. My hands shook as I opened it. First, a photograph. My mother at maybe 18, hair in a braid, standing beside Grandpa in front of this very house, both smiling in the unguarded way people do when no one is judging them. On the back, Grandpa had written, "Where roots find light." Beneath the photo lay letters, dozens, postmarked over 30 years. Grandpa writing to Mom writing back, none of them mailed. I scanned a few lines. They spoke of dreams for the property, plans to restore the orchard, promises to bring me out here when the family noise quiets. None of it ever happened. At the bottom of the stack, folded separately, was a short note in Grandpa's bold script. "They will deny you everything, but not this, not this." Taped below it, the original deed to the farmhouse and surrounding acres. My name filled the grantee line, notarized 2 years before Grandpa died. Amos's signature appeared as witness. A tremor ran through me, relief, grief, vindication, all braided into one fierce current. They'd tried to erase me, yet here was unshakable proof that I'd been the rightful heir long before their lies began. I walked to the front window and looked out over the field where goldenrod swayed under a hazy sun. The silence felt different here. Not empty, but protective, as if the land itself had been holding its breath until I arrived. Behind me, the house settled with a soft creak, like an old friend stretching after a long sleep. I clutched the deed, pulse steady, and understood suddenly why Grandpa built walls of quiet around his plans. Sometimes the loudest form of love is secrecy. Now I had everything they'd tried to bury. By dawn, the courthouse steps were slick with frost, each breath a small cloud. I walked up those stone stairs carrying a single leather portfolio, the deed from Quiet Hollow, the notarized transfer, the sheriff's sworn statement, and a flash drive holding Grandpa's final words. No one could erase all of that at once. Inside, the hearing room smelled of old varnish and nervous perfume. Long oak benches flanked a central aisle, and the high ceiling made every shuffle echo. Aunt May sat rigid near the front, pearls clutched in gloved fingers. Uncle Terence fussed with his tie, red-faced. Cousin Grayson offered me a tight nod. He had decided, at least for today, to sit on the truthful side of the aisle. And Wyatt, a state executor, self-appointed patriarch, leaned back as if the place were his living room, legs crossed, jaw set in a grin too wide to be sincere. Sheriff Leland stood near the wall, arms folded. His presence was a warning. This wasn't just family business anymore. The judge, a woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a low bun, entered promptly at 9. Everyone rose. When we sat again, the clerk called the matter, "In R.E. Estate of Henry Whitmore, petition for correction of title and allegation of fraud." My attorney, Evelyn, addressed the court first. Calm, direct. She laid out the timeline. Legitimate transfer, forged renunciation, the notary's admission. The Quiet Hollow deed discovered in my mother's maiden name. Each exhibit was handed up, marked, and projected onto a screen behind the bench. The judge's eyes followed every line. Wyatt's lawyer tried to object, claiming Grandpa was cognitively compromised. Evelyn slid forward the psychiatric evaluation from last year, clear mental capacity. Next objection. The renunciation bears Ms. Morgan's clear signature. Evelyn enlarged the forgery beside my verified signature. The differences shouted off the screen. A soft rumble spread through the benches. Wyatt shifted, shoulders tightening. Then came the audio. The tech plugged in my flash drive, and Grandpa's voice filled the room, crackling but unmistakable. He spoke of love, of quiet strategy, of handing everything to the girl who stayed. When he named Wyatt as the one circling like a buzzard, a collective breath hissed through the seats. Wyatt lurched half up. "This is manipulation." The judge raised a hand. "Sit, Mr. Morgan." He sat. When the recording ended, silence settled, heavy, undeniable. Leland stepped forward to present Cheryl's signed statement. She had notarized under Wyatt's direction while out of state, never witnessing my signature. The judge reviewed it, lips pressed thin. Finally, she spoke. The court finds the renunciation document fraudulent and void. Title remains with Vera Morgan, inclusive of all properties identified in the original and supplemental deeds. She eyed Wyatt. Relevant evidence will be forwarded to the prosecutor. Until then, Mr. Morgan, you will surrender any estate records in your possession. A deputy approached. Wyatt's smirk collapsed, and for the first time he looked small. Aunt May started to protest, but Uncle Terence pulled her back, head bowed. Grayson exhaled, shoulders dropping as if he'd been holding his breath for years. The gavel came down, sharp, final. Outside, cold sunlight spilled across the square. I stepped onto the courthouse lawn, clutching Grandpa's handwritten letter, the one that began it all. Wyatt, flanked by deputies, refused to meet my gaze. His boots scraped the concrete as they led him away for further questioning. Aunt May hurried after them, pearl necklace rattling like loose change. Grayson approached. "I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner," he said. "You just did," I replied, and it was enough. I unfolded the letter one last time. The ink had faded where my tears struck it months ago, but the words held steady. "Hold the line." I pressed the page back into its envelope and looked west, toward Quiet Hollow. Not to abandon my Bloomington life, but to protect the legacy Grandpa built in silence. The following week, I filed paperwork to establish the Whitmore Haven Fund, grants for caretakers, scholarships for kids who shoulder responsibilities older siblings ignore. The first board meeting convened in the restored farmhouse dining room, sun streaming across polished oak once dulled by dust. Amos attended, leaning quietly in the doorway, smiling when he saw strangers marvel at the old beams. Sheriff Leland dropped by with a box of donated law books for a reading corner. Even Grayson sent a check, no note attached. He didn't need to explain. I walked the property at dusk, wind threading through tall grass. Where vines once strangled fence posts, we planted saplings instead, markers of a future no one could sign away. I thought of the nurse who placed that first small envelope in my hand, of keys and sheds and voices that refused to stay buried. And that's how a quiet gift, passed from a grandfather's hand to a granddaughter's pocket, unraveled a room full of liars and rewrote what family means.